Welcome to the Reloader's Workshop tutorial part 2. In this video we'll be talking about entering load data into the Reloader's Workshop database. Now in part 1 we talked about the first 4 tabs at the top here: manufacturers, calibers, firearms, and supplies. This video will concentrate only on the load data tab. Now if you haven't seen part 1 of the tutorial, you'll probably want to go back and review that, especially if you're not familiar with how Reloader's Workshop operates. I'm going to be skipping over a lot of the general operation and entering supplies and things like that. So if you're not sure how that's done, or especially if you're, like I say, if you're new to Reloader's Workshop, go back and view part 1 before continuing with this video. The Load Data tab and the Batch Editor tab are organized a little bit differently than the other tabs in Reloader's Workshop. For example, under Supplies, handgun and rifle bullets are separated into groups. Here's the beginning of the handgun group, and then it has a list of all the handgun bullets. Then here's the beginning of the rifle group, and you see all the rifle bullets. Same thing for calibers. Here we have the beginning of all the handgun cartridges or calibers that you have available. And here's the beginning of the rifle calibers or cartridges that you have available in the database. On the Load Data tab and on the Batch Editor tab, we use filters to break up the rifle and handgun loads and batches that we have in our database. For instance, here I have under firearm type, I have handgun selected, and I see all the loads I have for handguns. If I change that to rifle, I'll see the loads for rifle. So they're not grouped into groups on the list here. They're actually filtered so that you only see one or the other. Now I can also add other filters here. For instance, right now it's listing any caliber. Well, if I only want to see 40 Smith & Wesson, it'll only show me the 40 Smith & Wesson loads that I have. I can also filter out by bullet. For example, I only want to see loads for the Hornady 400421 bullet, and it filters those out. And I can do the same thing with powders. If I go to any caliber, any bullet, I can then say I only want to see loads that use accurate number 7 powder, and it'll filter those out. So both the Load Data and the Batch Editor tab have the same filters available so that you can filter out loads that you're not interested in at the moment. Over time, these lists can get quite a lot of data, and the list gets very large. So we have the filters there so that you can pare that down and get down to only those loads or batches that you want to see. There's also an additional actions group there on the top on both the Load Data and Batch Editor tabs, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Now, the Load Data tab shows us, switch over to rifle here, shows the caliber or cartridge that the load is for, the bullet. Here we have the Hornady 3031 bullet, 0.308 inches, 150 grains fire point interlock bullet. It shows us the powder, the primer, the case, and the list of charges that we've entered from the reloading manual. Here we have the minimum charge listed in green, and it goes up to the intermediate charges listed in yellow, up to the maximum charge, which is listed in yellow or in red. And it does that for each of the loads, so you can see what the minimum and maximum charges you have entered, as well as all the intermediate charges. Now the ones I have here directly from the reloading manual, in this case from the Hornady 9th edition reloading manual. But you can add other charges if you want to put something in between charge 2 and charge 3, for example, maybe 40.5 grains. You can add those as well if you want to experiment with your own loadouts for your particular rifle. Now, some of these loads or some of these charges are listed in bold. And what that means is that we've actually created a batch of reloaded ammunition using that particular charge weight. So, and we'll talk about why that's important here in just a little bit. Now, the first thing we need to do is add our load data to the database. So I'm going to go ahead and on the load data tab, I'm going to add a new load. This will be a rifle load. I'm going to select the caliber, and you'll notice that I get a lot of calibers listed here. And this is where it really makes it easier if you use the hide unchecked button on the calibers tab here to hide the calibers that you're not interested in. Now I've checked only those cartridges that I actually load for. Here I've got 223 Remington service rifle, 300 AAC Blackout, 30-30 Winchester, and so on. So I've checked only those calibers or cartridges that I actually load. And then down the bottom left you can hit the hide unchecked. And that'll hide all the calibers or cartridges that I'm actually interested in. So when I'm over on the load data tab and I want to add new load data, I'll select rifle. Now I only see the rifle cartridges that I'm interested in. It knocks the list down quite a bit. So this is really where the hide unchecked buttons in the calibers tab and the supplies tab come into play. Now I'm going to enter a load here from the Hornady 9th edition, page 152, reloading manual, for 223 Remington. I'm going to be using the Hornady 2266 bullet, which is a spire point bullet with a cantilure. I'm going to be using IMR 4198 powder. I'll slide down to that. You see I have a lot of different powders listed. All the rifle powders are listed here at the moment. And I can go back to the supplies tab, and under powders I have only those powders that I actually use checked. So I'm going to go ahead and hit hide unchecked for so I only see those powders. Now bear in mind that when I hit hide unchecked on powders, it also will hide unchecked bullets and cases and primers as well. So if I want to use the 2266 bullet from Hornady, I need to make sure that the Hornady 2266 bullet is checked, and then hit hide unchecked again. You'll see 2266 is listed now. Okay, so I'll go back to my add load data. For 223 Remington, here's my Hornady 2266 bullet. And you'll see now that I only see the powders that I actually have I'm going to use. So there's the IMR 4198 powder. I only have one case listed, which is the Hornady 223 Remington case, because that's the only one I have checked. And I'm going to use Winchester small rifle primers for this particular load. Now, that gives me the components that I'm going to be using. And I'm going to add a charge to this load. The first charge listed is 17.4 grains of IMR 4198. It doesn't list a fill ratio, and if I want I can select this particular charge as a favorite or as a rejected charge, but I'll leave those blank for now. We'll get back to those. Now, the Hornady 9th edition lists this particular charge as providing a muzzle velocity of 2,800 feet per second. So I'm going to go ahead and add a test. I'll just leave today's date in there since that's the date I'm entering the load. The source is the Hornady 9th edition. Now I could also put the page number in there if I wanted to, but I normally don't do that. But that's up to you. You can put the actual page number in the Hornady 9th edition or whatever reloading manual you're using in there. Now they use a factory firearm. The firearm that they used has a barrel length of 26 inches. with a 1 in 12 inch twist. And they list a muzzle velocity of 2800. They don't list the pressure, or of course we don't have any group sizes or anything like that yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that test. And you see now I have Hornady 9th edition with the barrel length, all the data that I just typed in, muzzle velocity 2800 and so on. Okay. And then I'll add this charge to the loads charge list. And here I have the source, the 17.4 grains, factory firearm test, and all of that. Okay. This list here will grow as time goes on, but let's go ahead and just add the second charge. Now the second charge they list is 18.2 grains. Again, no fill ratio or any of that. I'm going to add the test. And you'll see here it puts in the last information that you typed in for the charge. So I don't have to keep typing this in over and over again. All I really have to do is come down here to the muzzle velocity and type in the new muzzle velocity. And I'll add that and add that charge. And you'll see the charge is listed here under the charge list. And I just do that for each of the charges listed in the book. And their muzzle velocities. One more here. 20 grains. And that'll give me a muzzle velocity of 3100. Okay, so now I have all the charges entered for that particular load or that particular combination of components. And I'm going to go ahead and add that to my list. And you'll see here that data has been entered. The Hornady 2266 bullet, IMR 4198 powder, Winchester small rifle primer, and the Hornady case. And here's my charges listed from 17.4, the starting charge, up to 20 grains, which is the maximum charge in the book. I can always come back and edit this charge or edit this load and add new charges if I want to, that sort of thing. I can even change the components at this point because this load has not been used in a batch yet. Once I've used this load in a batch of ammo, I can't change the components that make up the load because that would invalidate the batch altogether. Okay, I can go in and add new charges once it's been added to a batch. I can also edit the other charges that haven't been used. For example, we look at this charge here, or this load, for 3030 or 308 Winchester. We see that 40 grains and 41.7 grain charges have been used in a batch. They're listed in bold, whereas the other charges have not. So if I go back and edit this load, it tells me here, this load is used in 2 batches and cannot be edited. And you'll notice that all the components are grayed out. So I can't change any of this information because this load has been used in a batch already. Now, if I select the 40 grain charge and try to edit that, it'll tell me that this powder weight for this load has been used in 1 batch and may not be changed. Fill ratio, favorite, and reject selections may be changed. So I can change these fields here, but the powder weight, since it's been used in a batch already, can't be modified. Okay? If I select, say, the 38.4 and edit that charge, I am able to change the powder weight because it's never been used in a batch. So I can go back and edit that. So once you create a batch using a particular set of components and a particular charge, that set of components for that load and that charge can't be changed anymore. So make sure your data is correct before you go back and make a batch of ammunition using that particular set of components and that particular charge. So that's really all there is to entering the load. You enter the components for the load, the bullet, primer, case, and powder. You enter the charge weights for the load. Typically that's from the reloading manual. And you enter the test data for each charge. Again, that's typically from the reloading manual, although we'll see later how when we create batches and we test those batches, the test data will be transferred over to the loads from the batch. That'll be in a little bit here. Now, let's look at some of the other information on the load editor. Go back to the load that we just created for 223 Remington. First thing you see up here in the upper right-hand corner, we see some dimensions for this particular cartridge. We have the case trim length, the maximum case length, and the maximum cartridge overall length. Well, those first three pieces of information come directly from the cartridge on the calibers tab. We look at the 223 Remington, we see that the case trim length is 1.750. Here's the max case length of 1.760, and the maximum cartridge overall length of 2.260. Okay, and that matches the data that we see up here in the upper right, and that's where that comes from. Now, here we have the cartridge overall length with this bullet, okay, and it's 2.2 inches. Now, where does that come from? Well, if we go over on the Supplies tab and we select the Hornady 2266 bullet and take a look at that, down here under Cartridge Specific Data, if we come down here to 223 Remington, here for 223 Remington, it lists for this bullet, the cartridge overall length should be 2.2 inches. And again, that comes from the reloading manual. When the manufacturer puts together a load for one of their bullets, they'll list the cartridge overall length that you should use when using that bullet with this particular caliber or cartridge. So that's where that information comes from. The 2.2 inches we see here is from the bullet's cartridge specific data. Okay. Another thing you may notice here is these costs. We have the per unit cost for each of our components. Now right now they're all 0. And of course the cartridge cost over here on the right is 0. Well, that information comes from the Supplies tab. If we look at the Hornady 2266 bullet, we see down here at the bottom we have the pricing information. Now it has a field for a box of and a cost. So we can tell it that a box of 100 costs, say, $17, for example. Now, we're not telling it how many we have on hand, or how many we have in inventory at any given time. We're just telling it that a box of 100 costs $17. If you want to track how many you have on hand and get actual costs based on what you actually paid for the components, then you have to turn inventory tracking on the Preferences tab. But that will change dramatically the way Reloaders Workshop operates. So before you turn on inventory tracking on the Preferences tab, make sure you watch the Reloaders Workshop tutorial part 3 on inventory control, because a lot of things change when you turn inventory tracking on. For right now, we have inventory tracking turned off, and we're just telling Reloaders Workshop that a box of 100 costs $17. It has nothing to do with how many we actually have on hand. Okay? And once we do that, we see that we have a box of 100 costs $17 over here on the right. When we go to our Load Data tab, and we look at that load, you can see now that the per bullet cost has been filled in for us here at 17 cents. Now, each of these costs here, per unit costs, are displayed with 3 decimal places rather than 2. That's because the average cost of a component can come out to a fraction of a penny. The powder cost for a load will come out to, sometimes less than a penny, depending on how much you paid for the powder or how much the powder costs, and how many grains of powder you use in a particular load. So it always displays these per unit cost with 3 decimal places. Now, in order to get the full cartridge cost, since the only price we have in there right now is 17 cents per bullet, assuming that the cartridge cost is 17 cents. But let's go back to our Supplies tab, and we'll go to our cases and find the Hornady case for 223 Remington. And we'll tell it that a box of 50 of those costs, I don't know, $24.95. And update that. Come to our powder, our IMR 4198 powder. And here it's asking how much a can of costs. So a can of how many pounds. So I'll say a can of 1 pound of this would cost $30. And last, our primers, Winchester small rifle primers. We can get a box of 1,000 of these for $32 and update that. Now when we come over to our load data tab and look at that load, you'll see now all of the costs for each of our components have been entered into the appropriate spot here, and our cartridge cost is 78 cents. Now down here we can see how much the cartridge per cartridge cost would be if we're using cases that were once loaded once before, twice before, so on. So if they were loaded once before, I'll put a 1 here, and you'll see that knocks the cartridge cost down to 53 cents. It also knocks the per case cost down to 25 cents. That's because originally the cases cost us 50 cents to buy, but now we've used them twice. So effectively the per case cost is 25 cents. If we change this to a 2, meaning the case has been loaded twice before, it knocks our per cartridge cost down to 44 cents. And our case cost has gone down to a little over 16.5 cents a piece. Okay, so we can kind of use that to see what our average per cartridge cost would be over the lifetime of those cases. Say if we plan on loading those cases 10 times, we come up with an average cartridge cost of 32 cents per cartridge. Okay, so in order to get the cost information here in our load, you have to go back to the Supplies tab and tell Reloaders Workshop how much things cost. For a box of 100 bullets, or a pound of powder, or 8 pounds of powder, or a box of 50 cases or 100 cases, that sort of thing. Okay, so that's the cost calculations, and we'll see that again when we get to the batch editor. Now, another thing you'll notice, I'm going to go ahead and hit Add here to add a new cartridge, or a new load rather. Here we have 223 Remington. Here's our Hornady 2266. I'll select IMR 4198 powder. And I'll leave these the same. If we come down here then and check 223 Remington service rifle, you'll notice that we don't get any bullets listed or any cases listed. Well, that's because over on our Supplies tab, we didn't tell it what cases and bullets are available for 223 service rifle. For example, let's look at that bullet that we just used, the Hornady 2266, and look under the cartridge specific data. Well, we have 223 Remington listed there. We don't have 223 service rifle. So if we want to create a load using this bullet for 223 service rifle, we would have to add 223 service rifle to that list. Of course, the 223 service rifle isn't listed here because according to the caliber information, this bullet is not appropriate for 223 service rifle, but it is appropriate for 5.56 NATO, which is currently not listed in this particular bullet under cartridge specific data. And if we come over here to load data and attempt to add a new load for 5.56 NATO, again, we don't get the bullet. But if I come back to Supplies, I edit that bullet, and I add 5.56 NATO to the cartridge specific data for that bullet. I'll update that. Come back to load data, hit add, select 5.56 NATO. Now we see that the Hornady 2266 bullet is available for use with this load. So in order for the load editor to see a bullet, it has to have that particular caliber or cartridge listed as one of the usable cartridges for that bullet. Okay, now I'm going to come back here and I'm going to remove 5.56 NATO from that list here because I don't have load data for that this bullet in a 5.56 NATO cartridge, so I don't want to use that. Okay, I just wanted to illustrate to you that in order for the load editor to see that bullet for a particular cartridge type, it has to have cartridge-specific data listed for that cartridge for that bullet. Okay. Now, one of the things that you may run across too is that you want to use the same load, but the only thing you want to do is maybe use a different primer. We want to use, say, the Tool Ammo 223 small rifle primers for a new load. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Add. I'll select 223 Remington and rifle. I'll select the same bullet. I'll select the same powder, the same case, but this time here I have the Tool Ammo KVB 223 small rifle primer selected. Now, I don't want to have to go in and type the same information over and over and over again just from changing the primer. Well, there's a button down here under the powder charge data called Copy Charge List. I'm going to go ahead and hit that. And it'll list all the components that I have here, the bullet, powder, primer, and case. And I want it to match the bullet, and I want it to match the case. And what that'll do is filter out all the loads that don't match this bullet and this case. And here we have the load that we just put in with the Hornady 2266 bullet, the Winchester small rifle primer, and the Hornady case. But this time I want to use the Tool Ammo primer. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and I'm going to copy that, hit the OK button, and what it'll do is it'll copy all of the charges from the load that uses the Winchester primer over to this load which uses the Tool Ammo primer. That way I don't have to go in and type in all the charges and the charge tests and all of that kind of thing if all I want to do is try a different primer with this particular load. Now I can hit Add, and you'll see it adds that load to my list. I have two 223 Remington loads here. Let me filter out all the other loads there, so we just have the 223 Remington loads. Well, here's the first load we typed in with the Winchester small rifle, and here's the new one we just created using the Tool Ammo primer. So you can see it's very easy to create a new load that just uses maybe a different case or a different primer, and I have mail, without having to type in all the charges over again. All that data can be copied over. There's one other situation that I'll cover here real quick. Some reloaders will use a set of mixed cases. Maybe they bring some brass home from the range, and it's all different manufacturers, and they'll clean it up and trim it up and get it ready to reload, but they don't really sort it by manufacturer. They just leave it in a mixed bag. Well, if we look over here under Manufacturers tab, we see this generic manufacturer, and right now he's set up to supply primers and cases. You can add other things to it, but this generic manufacturer is there so that you don't have to pick a specific case, for example. Now I'll come over here to the Supplies tab and list my cases. And you see right now I have Hornady, Winchester, Lapua, Norma cases. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new case to the list here. I'm going to select that generic manufacturer. I'll leave the part number blank. Firearm type is rifle, and I'll put 223 Remington in for my caliber. Go ahead and put part number there, and I'll hit the Add button. It tells me I'm currently hiding unchecked supplies. I don't have the auto check new supplies and calibers turned on in preferences. says my new case will not appear on the supplies list unless it's checked. Do you want to check it now? I'll go ahead and say yes, and it'll check it for me, so it shows up on the list. Now I have this generic manufacturer, generic case for 223 Remington. Now if I come back to my load data tab and I add a new load, what I'll do is I'll select that generic 223 Remington case, maybe the Winchester small rifle primers, and my accurate 4198 powder. And I'll use the same bullet, 2266. Then what I can do is hit the copy charge list button, and you'll see it shows the two charges that I have in there for 223. I want to match the bullet, I want to match the primer, but in this case I don't want to match the case. And it shows me my load that has the 2266 bullet with the Winchester small rifle primer and the Hornady case. And I'll go ahead and click OK and have it copy over the charges. And now I'll add that. Now I have a load that uses a generic case, not a case from any specific manufacturer. Now when you're using that copy charge button, you need to be careful. If you create a load with a different primer, for example, different primers can produce different pressures in the chamber when you fire that cartridge. Also, cases have different neck wall thicknesses, and the fill ratio will change from case to case and give you different pressures when you fire those cartridges. So, and especially with the bullet, if you're using a bullet that's a different weight, the charges may not be valid at all. You may run into a serious overpressure situation. So be careful when using that copy charge button. Make sure that the charges that you're copying are appropriate for the bullet and the primer and the case that you're copying those charges over to. It'll always match the powder. If you use a different powder, it just won't list those charges or those loads to copy. But you can still run into trouble with just changing the bullet or the primer or the case, especially if you use a heavier bullet. These charges may not be appropriate at all for that heavier bullet. Let's talk about these groups up here at the top here. On the left is the filters, and we've kind of seen how that works a little bit. I'm going to select any caliber here, and this will list all the loads for any caliber, any bullet, and any powder. If I want to see what loads I have that use the IMR 4064 powder, I can select that, and it'll only list those loads that use IMR 4064. I can pare that down even further. Select IMR 4895, and I can pare that down a little bit further by selecting only those loads that use the Hornady 30501 bullet. So I can use these filters up here to kind of pare down this list so that I can find the particular load that I'm looking for. I'm going to reset my filter so all my loads are shown here. And that's really all there is to the filters. You can select rifle or handgun. You can select caliber, bullet, and powder. And pare down this list a little bit. Now over here under additional actions, we've got 4 buttons. Now right now 3 of them are grayed out. We can't select those. We only have the import share file turned on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check some of my loads here that I'm interested in. And once at least one of these loads is checked, the Evaluate Shopping List and Create Share File buttons will all turn on again. Now the shopping, we'll talk about this Evaluate button in a little bit after we enter some batch test data. It's a shopping list button. What it'll do is allow me to create a shopping list that I can take to a gun show or a gun shop with me. So I know what powders, bullets, cases, and primers I need in order to create those loads. Now it lists the 4 different components in their own sections here. Gives me the bullet identifier, the diameter, the weight. The quantity on hand will always be blank unless you have inventory tracking turned on. With inventory tracking turned on, it'll actually tell you how many you have of each component in your shop, so you can determine if you need more or not. And under estimated cost, with inventory tracking turned off, it will only show costs for those components that we actually typed in cost information over on the supplies tab. With inventory tracking turned on, it would show me the actual cost that I paid, say, for 100 bullets or 100 cases or a pound of powder, that sort of thing. So this gives me the ability to create a shopping list that I can take with me to a gun show or something, and I'll know exactly what I've got in my shop. I'll know how much I can expect to pay to see if I'm getting a good deal or not. And more importantly, I know what components I need in order to create the loads that I've checked over here on the loads page. Okay. Now, the 2 buttons for creating a share file and importing a share file. These are there. I'm going to uncheck all of my loads here, and I'm going to select just 223 Remington, so I get my 3 loads that we've been working with here shown. Now, if I have a particular load that I'm proud of and I want to send it to a buddy of mine who's also using Reloader's Workshop, what I can do is check that particular load that I want to send to him, and I can hit the Create Share File button. And what this will do is bring up the share file file selector, and the directory that it defaults to will be on the current Windows drive under Users, Public, Reloader's Workshop, Share. Now this is where the Reloader's Workshop directory here is where it stores its regular data. Under the Share directory is where it will store its the share files that you create. Now you can change this. You can select exactly where you want to create your share file, but the default is to go to this share directory under the Reloader's Workshop data directory. Okay, and I'll put in a name. I'll say, hey, try this loadout. Okay, any valid file name can be put in here, and I'll hit the save button. Tells me my share file has been created successfully, and this file can be emailed or otherwise sent to a friend who is also using Reloader's Workshop. I'll hit OK. Now, what that's done is create that share file. A share file has an RWS extension on it for Reloader's Workshop Share. And then I can use my email program to email that file to someone else who's using Reloader's Workshop and share my load or my favorite load with them. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete this load that has the tool ammo primer in it. That's the load that I just created a share for, just so you can see how the import works. Okay, so now I've deleted that particular load. Now, once I've received a share file from someone, I'll save it to the disk somewhere, and I'll hit Import Share File. And again, it defaults to the share directory under the Reloader's Workshop data folder. And here's the one I just created. Hey, try this loadout.rws for Reloader's Workshop Share. And I'll hit Open. And it tells me the share file has been imported successfully with one load. I hit OK. And now you can see that load has come back because that's the load that was in the share file. And it's loaded into my load list here. Now, if the manufacturer of the bullet or the bullet itself or the powder or whatever wasn't in the database when I import the share file, it'll also add the manufacturer, the bullet, the primer, the case, all of those things so that when it puts in the load, all of that data is valid. You know, there's an actual powder in the database, that the primer is in the database, and so on. Okay. So those are the additional actions that you can take right now with Reloaders Workshop. And like I said, we'll talk about the evaluate button in a little while. That's all for this video. I hope you liked it. If so, please click the like button. Maybe even subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and happy reloading.